This is the show for sales professionals and their leadership wanting to be the best. My name is Gert Schultz. Welcome to Best Practice for Sales Professionals. Success in sales comes from alignment between the heart and the mind. My guest today helps people achieve exactly that, so they can achieve remarkable peak performance. She's a clinical performance psychologist, and she works with elite athletes, 3 premier football clubs, and business people. Annemieke Griffin, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm very excited to be here.
It's great to have you on the show. Now, Annemieke, we're going to talk about success, but you told me that in order to have success, understanding failure is a really important part when it comes to top performance. Why is that?
Oh, that's so true. Well, if we're talking about top performance, we're talking about being the best that you can be. So that already, encompasses growth. What is growth? Growth is all about learning. Learning is this huge chain of trial and error. So we need failure, we need mistakes, making mistakes to grow. You do something, input, output, you try something, you think like, oh, it's not really the result that I wanted. I have to tweak my approach a little bit so I can do better next time. I grow, I learn. And, learning, growing, that is really the heart of top performance.
Interesting. So why should salespeople be aware of the effects failure can have on their performance?
Well, it's not so much the effect that failure has, it's the interpretation about failure that people have. A lot of people if they make a mistake, they internalize it. It's not like, hey, I made a failure there. It's like, I am the failure. And you can understand, if you think about that, you get a negative emotion and you start to avoid situation because you don't want to feel that negative emotion. So for salespeople, if something doesn't work out, they start to avoid specific situation, maybe make less phone calls or, play it safe more. It's kind of like go for the smaller clients, for the smaller events out there. So failure is connected with avoidance. So fear of failure makes you avoid situations, and obviously it leads to a decline in your performance.
That's super interesting, and I understand this because when, as a young salesperson myself, I didn't like the failure of speaking to somebody and they would say no to me. So instead of breaking through that barrier, I avoided having those conversations, which of course in turn actually affected my performance negatively. Does that make sense?
That's exactly what happens. So you avoid, you put yourself less out there, and before you know it, you get this self-fulfilling prophecy. You have in your mind like, I'm the failure, I'm not doing it right. You start taking less action, your performance declines, and in a way, you kind of like the thought that you have about yourself, get reinforced. But that's totally wrong. It's because you take less action, because you have this fear of failing, because you make it personal. You don't see it as an incident. It's I'm the failure. It's not, hey, this is an incident. It can happen next time better.
Wow. So when you start working with people, you work with elite athletes, right? The guys and girls who are right at the top of their game. What are the typical failure-related issues you have to resolve or you come across?
Avoidance. When I look at in my own day-to-day practice, let's say the soccer player, we see that they take less risk. And in soccer, you want people to push forward, play forward, and they start thinking backwards. So you see more and more players that play the safe ball, so to the side or backwards and not more to the front. And when you take that parallel to salespeople, it's really kind of like, how much action do they still take? Maybe, they call 20 people a day, they start calling 15 people a day, 10 people a day until they fall flat because they don't want to put them in that position that failure can occur. And it has everything to do about what is your perception about failure? How do you interpret failure? Do you make it personal, or do you see this as an isolated incident? It has everything to do with perception, what kind of behavioral reaction you get.
Wow. So what are the typical strategies that you then apply to I guess what you're saying is, do you see it as an incident, something that just happened, or do you take it personally? How do you start working with people on that?
Well, I always said you have to emphasize effort over failure. It's all about effort because we are in control about the amount of effort that we put into something. So also when I talk to coaches, when it comes to their players, effort over failure. It isn't about is something good or right. Did a person show up? Were they there? Did they take responsibility? Were they in? Did they give them all? That's what it's about. And the result is not 100% under our control anyway. It's all about effort over failure for yourself and for the people around you.
Interesting. So when, let's say you would give a sales manager some best practice advice on how to deal with failure in their sales teams, what does that look like?
Well, very much start with having the right perception when it comes to failure. So when you are like at head of a sales team, it's very much that you don't talk about failure in a way it's right or wrong. No, failure is this isolated moment. It's this information bubble, and it tells you if you have to tweak your approach a little bit to get the result that you want. That's it, and it's nothing more than that. I never talk about failure. I talk about information. And keep focusing on those things that people have 100% control over. That's their behavior, that's their attitude that they have towards something. It's not about a result. You're never 100% over the control how your client is going to react on your phone call. There's a lot of other factors that, have some kind of influence on that. So effort over failure, and look very much at like, what is my perception on failure? Is it personal, or do I see it for what it is?
Picking you up on that point about attitude is something we can influence. Can you just say something about that?
So with attitude, I very much, when it comes to fear of failure, your attitude has to be action orientated. So it's okay to feel when you make a mistake or a failure, that you feel that negative emotion for a little bit. That's okay. When you're a peak performer and something doesn't work out, it's okay to feel it. But I would say feel it, close the book, and take the next step. Learn from it. And that last part, action, take next step, next, that is very important.
So if you were going to give salespeople watching the show 3 tips on how to deal with failure and do something positive with it, what would those three tips be, Annemieke?
First tip, and I talked about avoidance a lot, if you notice with yourself that you get less motivated, that your productivity goes downward, so you feel that something is pushing you back, really start looking at yourself like, what does failure mean to me? Do I make that personal? Am I too harsh on myself? And what would I say to a friend? From kind of like my colleague makes a phone call, gets a no, what would I tell him? And usually it's like, they're very kind, next time better. So why do you have that double standard when it comes to yourself and you're so overly harsh to yourself? So that first and foremost. And another very important point is just show up. Making a mistake, it's only a sign that you're there, you're taking responsibility, and you dare to be vulnerable to growth. Because in order to grow, we need to be vulnerable. We have to put ourselves out there. So, see it in that light. Making a mistake, it's a sign you were there, you were trying, and feel good about that. You can be proud of yourself because you were in the arena. You make yourself vulnerable, you took responsibility. So really try to change your view on what failure actually is. It's you showing up, you making yourself vulnerable and giving yourself an opportunity to learn.
Wow. Annemieke, thanks for coming on the show, and thanks for your insights. I know you recently moved from the US to Belgium, to Brussels. Good luck with building the business further there, and your email address is coming across right now here on the screen. Thanks again.
Thank you so much. Thank you.